about it, that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that. You're going to have to set it out.
Hey everyone, my name is Andre Walton, the Southeast Regional Organizer for OWR, and welcome to The Revolution. My guest today is running for the 3rd Congressional District of Wisconsin, Mark Neumann. Thanks for joining me today, Mark. How you doing today?
Thanks, Andre. I'm doing good.
Awesome. So you're running for a seat that's been currently held by Ron Kine, who's been in office since 1997. What made you make the decision to run a primary against him?
When we search our hearts, we usually find a lot of reasons for the things we do, and then we're surprised later that there's even others that we didn't even know about. But a couple of them one of them is obvious, and that is my concern that we need a single-payer universal health care financing system for the whole country. It's commonly called Medicare for All. The full name is Single-Payer Universal Comprehensive Health Insurance for the whole nation, or National Health Insurance Plan. And there's a nice piece of legislation in the Congress. It's H.R. 1384, introduced by Pramila Jayapal last February, a year ago. And it has about 120 co-signers. And my representative isn't one of them. And I've petitioned him, asked him, and it doesn't seem like he's able to do that. And so that's a major issue that we need to push forward and solve this cruel healthcare financing system.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, none of the Congress people in Wisconsin have signed on to Pramila Jayapal's bill in the House, which is really concerning considering everything that's going on with COVID. But it's really good to get a chance to speak with you, obviously, because you're a doctor, and I really want to get your perspective on the congressional response to the COVID crisis. Because instead of instituting a Medicare for All system, Congress instead decided to prop up private industries like Cobra. What's your response to how Congress has reacted to the crisis, and what would you have suggested if you were in Congress?
Well, I think our Congress has been handicapped by a very ineffective and chaotic executive branch of our government. I'm not saying that their legislation is as great as it could be, but if I've had an opportunity to participate in the discussion, I would advocate for much more support down on the base of our economy. That would be small businesses, but even more perhaps those who are most central to making an effective response to our COVID pandemic. And those are local governments and state governments that are carrying the ball. And they're under a lot of duress in order to do a good job. But from my perspective here in Western Wisconsin and in my own county and my own state, I'm seeing that there's some very great public servants trying to help all of us in our communities to make a response. And I think the federal government would do well to look at that energy and say, how can we support you? Our country is so big, and every region has its own sort of pace with this epidemic, and it comes in waves. And so the response has to be much more specific to that particular point in time. It's hard to get that kind of granular type of guidance from a national perspective, but from the highest levels, we can look for best practices and spread them around and support the people who are doing the work in the field, in the local level. That would be what I would love to see in terms of our federal response to this pandemic.
Yeah, because as of right now, it seems like our Congress is mostly going with the trickle-down approach, which hasn't trickled down, I guess to say, because we're seeing right now that billionaires are growing their wealth, and the poor and middle class are actually hurting more with all that has happened. But before the crisis had even begun, over half the country was already living paycheck to paycheck. And as the COVID crisis hit, more people had to deal with inadequate medical responses as far as like going to get tested and also going to have to deal with the payments of the medical bills. And
Hmm.
Congress' only response was to give a one-time $1,200 check. Uh, what would you propose differently to address the growing needs of families as far as like financial help?
I think part of our response is to get a better appreciation that this isn't just a 1 month deal or we're going to get through it in a couple of months. Maybe that initial support was with a lot of hopefulness that, if we can just get through a couple of months, then maybe we can pop back. And that's fair. This is a new virus. It has a new biology, and it's certainly not played itself out along those lines. So we're in for a long haul. That's become more evident over the last 4, 5, 6 months. It's just going to be with us not only for months, but possibly years before we can get the so-called magical herd immunity. And so I think the direction would be to react or proactively engage with that perspective. So a one-time fix, a little bit here, a little bit there, is not going to help us out. But to guide all of us and our neighbors into a ongoing proactive team effort as a huge team, 330 million people, to hopefully regain some trust that our government works for us, because our government has been vilified for the last 3 or 4 decades. And that's been to the advantage of people who don't live sort of in the ordinary world. They're jet setting all over the world. And so when, with their wealth and power, there's not a lot of interest for our government to be very functional necessarily. And we need, and so there's like a propaganda campaign to vilify as Ronald Reagan said, don't believe that the government is the solution to your problem. It's the source of your problems. And that was just kind of the beginning. Well, actually, it wasn't the beginning. It's probably in the middle of this vilification campaign. But anyway, when it comes to making expenditures, we just have to do it. And people get all hung up with, oh, we're going to have, huge debts and so forth. That isn't an issue when you're facing a crisis with a sovereign monetary system. This is our economy, and it has to serve us. It has to serve human beings. Human beings are not born into this world to serve the economy. The economy has to serve us. And so if we need to, and we do, need to make expenditures for the base so that we can continue to develop our economy in this reality, we just do it. And what's the downside? You say, well, we might have, inflation. Well, if we have inflation, we can fix that. But those who are rich and powerful won't like it. It's a progressive taxation. And so it's easier from their perspective, or maybe more greedily easy to say, well, we can't take on all this debt. When we need to, we have to, because the economy, the monetary system is there for human beings, not the other way around.
Yeah, and staying on the topic of the economy for a second, I think we can see a massive disconnect between how the wealthy react to a crisis and the poor react to the crisis, because we can see the stock market kind of staying leveled or going up in the time of multiple people losing their jobs and having to sign up for unemployment. How do you think? I think you can definitely say that there's a broken structure within the way our economy is measured and how it works. Do you think there should be a restructuring of the economy compared to how it is now to make it work better for working families?
Well, yeah, obviously, I mean, unfortunately, I should say, we measure like the stock market. Who cares? I mean, when it comes to living a human life and um, thriving in your own communities, the stock market doesn't make any difference to us. But every day, oh, the stock market's up, the stock market's down, like that's some panacea, like that's some great achievement. But when we measure the function of our economy, it should be measuring how much we as a community are fulfilling our human life to thrive. And what I mean by that is we're born into this world. Our mothers giving us birth don't want us just to become cogs in the machine for an economy. They want her children to grow up and be respected, to be engaged in a community, to have a family, to engage in love and to be loved, and to be able to explore and be able to create. And those are the things that our economy should be driving towards. Those are the measuring points. How much are we able to do that as human beings? But instead, our economy, the way it's framed a lot of times is how can we get the cheapest price, squeeze the most efficiency, and have people treat it like they're just some sort of function within this huge machine. And it goes back to what I was just saying before. Instead of having the economy serving us, we ourselves end up feeling like we're just pieces in this machine that doesn't really care about us. And so to change it, us, the ordinary folks, need to get over being told that the stock market's up or down. Who cares? What we need to do is see, as my neighbor living a full life, experiencing happiness and thriving. And if that's the case, if those are our measures, then stock market can do whatever the heck it wants to do.
Exactly. And I think it's safe to say we do need a restructuring of the economy in a big way, relatively. But shifting gears a little bit, we've seen reports that we have less than 12 years to address the climate crisis before we have irreversible damages. What plans do you support to address the climate situation right now?
Definitely, we need to transition off of fossil fuel as our major source of energy. I don't expect that humanity going forward is going to use less energy. I think that we will continue to use a lot of energy, but we need it to be renewable. The most important source of energy for us, of course, is our sun. And that has to be developed, and there are a multitude of ways of doing that, and they're becoming more efficient. And so it's obvious, get off of fossil fuel and transition to other sources like renewable energy and sun-sourced energy. A lot of those ideas are explored and exposed and developed in the Green New Deal. But beyond that, I believe that the United States, on the federal level, needs to take in charge its position in the world, in the community of all nations. That we, as our economy is, a major, if not the largest, most successful economy for now, we need to be in a leadership role. We need to be offering to all of other nations participation in a plan, in a proactive response to the changes that are coming. It's not an issue of hoping that they won't come or that it can be reversed. We've passed tripping points that there will be continued change. Major changes could include things like 2 to 3 billion people needing to find new locations for living by 2050, as was reported by the National Institute of Science in a recent report. Can you imagine a third of the population of a human population of our planet needing to move? There's going to be geopolitical stresses, migrations of people like we've never imagined, and that's going to cause all kinds of international and humanitarian stress. And for the United States, as important as we are in our position of the community of nations, we need to be in the front. We need to be guiding the research and the searching for potential responses So it's an issue of mitigation and proactive responsiveness to the threats, and not one of sitting back and twiddling our thumbs and hoping that, oh, it won't be that bad.
Yeah. I think one of the big reasons why that is because the issue has been turned political, even though it's not really a political issue, but it's a humanitarian, planetary issue that we have to deal with. But not only are we going through massive issues with healthcare, the climate, and economic, but we're also going through some serious social issues right now, and that has to do with the abuse of power by certain police departments of this country. And we can see that with endless accounts of police brutality, uh, which is why we're seeing constant protests right now, protests for George Floyd, protests for Breonna Taylor. And actually, even recently here in Sheboygan, there was a man killed by a police officer. What would you propose to deal with the issue of police brutality in our country?
Um, in some ways, I feel some hopefulness that I haven't felt as I observe the response of people in protests, not only in the United States but internationally. And to me, that gives me a sense of hope, that I hope that I'm not being fooled, because we've been through this, episodes of trying to deal with our biases or prejudices and our racism over and over again. But maybe we're turning a page. Maybe it's like a Me Too moment, or maybe it's like a marriage equality moment. I hope so. We have to do, we have to take the, seize the moment and try to go forward with it. When it comes to our community policing, unfortunately, the community police have been militarized, and there's a lot of issues. I think the war on drugs had a huge contribution to that, and the hyper incarceration, from a very false premise back from President Nixon, politically initiated to deal with some of his political opponents, like the hippies and and the Black Americans. And so we start this war on drugs, and we carry that stupid thing forward, and it has become a huge burden on our life together in community. Instead of treating substance use disorder as a public health issue and as a health issue and a diagnosis, medical issue, we turn it into something it's not, and cause all kinds of damage. But our community police have been, sucked into that evolution of 3 or 4 decades, dumped military surplus onto them, from different, bills in the past, and then also allowed them to get used because we as a community are not willing to deal with our own, like our fear. So the most potent emotion that we have as human beings and all living creatures with a central nervous system is our emotion of fear, because it is so critical to the survival of an individual, that fight, flight, or freeze response. And because that is so easy to grab onto, to grab people's fear response, it's because it's so central to our survival and so deep within the function of our central nervous system, and then sort of the primitive regions. It blocks out the other good emotions that we need to thrive as human beings. But it also allows us, with that fear response, to get sucked into the social engineering programs of political us against themism, as I say. And so we make enemies, get that fear response, and then it becomes hyper divided, partisan, and so forth. And unfortunately, once again, our community police have been sucked into that, because they're going to be the controllers of the more potent part of our community against other parts of our community that are seen as less, certainly less economically potent or strong, but also there's that fear that I don't understand their traditions and their heritage, and therefore my heritage is threatened by that, and therefore I need to control that group, and we get our community police sucked into that. So we have a big problem. We have to fix this. And people talk about defunding the police, and I think that raises a very good point for conversation, because resources that we've pushed further and further into our militarized policing, community policing operations could be used in other areas by other resources, social workers or teachers or counselors or all kinds of community workers that would be much more fit to deal with a lot of the things that have been pushed onto our community police. And so I think that's a really good thing to take, to help us to give us a focus for conversation. And as long as people can be respectful to one another and try to listen to one another, we can go forward. Another thing to think about too is we're always developing our skill set. So when I was an intern and a resident, I was learning all kinds of things back in the early 80s that would be inadequate in 2020, because best practices have developed way past what I learned as a young doctor. And so for our police officers, the same thing. What's been done in the past are not acceptable patterns of professional action. And so when we have standards of police procedures, we need to keep pushing them forward and developing better best practices, and not to condemn, people doing things in the past. Some of the things that I did, I thought I was doing as the best doctor I could. If I would look back and say, boy, I wish I knew what I was doing better, from a 35-year perspective. So that part plays in too. We have to move forward and demilitarize and support and redistribute resources to other operators in our communities. There's all kinds of things that can be done.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a key point right there, is that we have to continue to learn. And I think one of the big issues is that there's kind of this sense of a one-size-fits-all approach, and if we just put more police in there, then it'll fix the issue. But we know that doesn't fix the underlying issues that lead to issues in the community. But I think one of the reasons why a lot of these issues, from police brutality to climate change to healthcare, basically any issue that we care about as people, are not addressed, is because of money in politics and the corrupting influence of it. And usually, if you see special interest groups or wealthy donors donating to politicians, they tend to ignore those issues that most of us care about. I read a Princeton study that said if a special interest group backs a certain policy, it has a 45% chance of passing Congress. If it isn't backed by them, but backed by the people, it drops down to 18%.
Yeah, it's just random.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. So it's pretty much us as people have almost no effect on public policy because of the influence of money in politics. What is your stance on money in politics, and what would you suggest to remedy that issue?
Andre, at the beginning of our conversation today, you asked me why am I in the position I am, engaged in an electoral campaign. And I said, well, there's a multitude of reasons. And another major one is what you're alluding to right now. To distinguish myself from Mr. Kind, Congressman Kind, who I'm running against in this particular primary election, I think that Congressman Kind is very well adapted to the way Washington, D.C. functions. And we have this crazy dysfunctional campaign financing system that favors those with a lot of financial wealth and power, because our elected officials, in order to keep their jobs, think that they have to gobble up lots of money so that they can lead another super marketing campaign every 2 years. and our campaigning becomes an issue of marketing battles, propagandizing battles. They're really not job interviews. And what our electorate needs is to have an opportunity to meet candidates and see, is this individual someone that resonates with me, that I can trust, that I believe hears me, and will be able to carry my concerns into the legislative process in Washington, D.C. But we don't do that. We don't allow that type of interaction because we'd rather just have scary ads on TV and all kinds of marketing blitzes. But when you have a lot of money and you have this huge war chest, even our wagging heads, the political commentators, they always, well, how much money does the campaign have? Like that's the wherewithal that means everything, because they're talking about the same sort of stupidity and not what we really need as a democracy. So I wanted to get into the campaign, into the electoral political project, because I don't believe in or support or ever expect to participate in that type of operation. I believe that campaigning should be publicly funded. It's a public good when it's done right, meaning that when we're trying to discover who our candidates are, what their message is, what their brand is, who they represent, how they carry themselves, what their character is. Those are important things that we as voters need to know about those people that we're thinking about hiring to do this very important work to develop policy. And so that public good should be supported by public funding because it's a huge benefit to us all to make our democracy run. But we have private funding to do this, and those private funds, they all have their their expectations and their strings attached. And so it develops a distorted picture. And the Princeton study that you referred to was startling. I'm familiar with that too. And it's just like another reason to try to do this because that is just ridiculous. I think I got a big kick in the behind when President Trump gave his inaugural address, was the 19th of January in 2017. And it just, at that point, I said, I can't spend the rest of my life not being engaged in politics. This is what I need to do. I need to learn how to do it. I need to participate in this because I don't have that many more years left. I can see the sun. It's in the west in my life. And what I want to do at this point is say I'm going to do the best I can to contribute to this tradition of democracy that we've been trying to develop over the last 250 years, make a good contribution, and hand it on to the next generation. I want to do that. And I have a son who's 14 years old. I want him to receive hopefully a little bit healthier democracy as we pass it down generation to generation. And certainly we have to get way beyond this crazy campaign financing system right now. United to Amend is one movement, and repairing gerrymandering is another thing we need to do. I mean, there's all kinds of these things that we need to do to fix to improve our democratic process for the next generation.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that you care about this issue so much because I really do think it's the underlying issue that affects all issues. But Mark, how can people help out your campaign or get involved right now?
The most important thing for me is just spread my name. I'm an unknown in many regards. As a physician, I worked in hospitals. Didn't even have a panel of patients because I was a hospital-based doctor doing critical care. And so it was a very intense engagement with families, but there weren't that many families, fortunately for them, that came into my life over the years. But I'm very engaged now in trying to promote the health of our community, people in our community, and the health of our planet. And that's my intention. And if others believe that I can make a good contribution, spread the word in any way you can by social media. We do have a website, and we're trying to, put some video there that people could be able to use, like what you're doing today, Andre, to maybe get a chance to meet this guy, Dr. Mark Neumann, and think, does he really say stuff that resonates with me? Spread the word. That's the most important thing that would help. And that is the core of our democracy. It was amazing when I lived in Africa how quickly important issues, important things can pass through common life. There might be an event, for example, in Lukafu, that's the place where I lived, and Mingo was 60 miles away. And I would get in a Jeep. Some important thing happened in our village. I'd get in the Jeep driving into Lubumbashi. By the time I got to Minga, people are talking about it. And I'm saying, how in the heck did it get? We don't have telephones. I'm exaggerating a little bit. Yeah. But human beings love gossip. We love to tell each other what's important, what got our attention. And if this campaign gets your attention, just spread the word in any way you can. I really appreciate that. The website is my name, Mark Neumann for Congress.gov, not gov, but com. And if you Google Mark Neumann, be careful. There was another congressman 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That's not me. So make sure you get the right one, www.markneumann4congress.com.
All right. Well, again, everybody who views this, please go and donate to Mark's campaign. If we want to keep our grassroots candidates to keep running for office, they're going to need our support, and obviously they're going to need our funding as well. But again, I appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for coming on to the show, and hopefully we can spread your message across the interwebs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Carry on the good work.
Really?
Thank you.
So we always say in the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary.